Donna Close is a creative director and cultural strategist who develops strategy and creative programs across the world. Wow. She has a particular interest in supporting the artists to make use of technology to create new types of live experience for audiences, particularly in the outdoors and unusual spaces. There are many people in this room that will know Donna for her work that she did, along with Karen Poley, working for Zap Arts for 10 incredible years before going on to produce the award-winning White Knight in Brighton. Donna is a Senior Research Fellow at the University of Brighton, where in 2018 she produced the AHRC-funded XR Circus project with Professors Helen Kennedy and Sarah Atkinson. She's also an Associate Director of Northampton-based Threshold Studios and is a consultant working from time to time with Festival and Events International. Donna.
Brilliant, thank you. Thanks for that. That saves me having to say a lot of that because you can see I've got very, very many hats on. And what I'm really pleased to see is that I think all of the speakers have broken the rules in the same place. We've sent a whole set of questions, but I don't know if we've been affected by the sort of discourse around the election, but I think we've actually all taken this approach about really sort of trying to celebrate the similarities and the opportunities and demystify some of the fear around the collaborations between outdoor arts and technology, because the thing that I've learned over that 20 years, 10 years working very much in outdoor arts, and then from being really, really, interested in I guess sort of how technology was affecting not just the way that art is made, but also the way that audiences, what audiences want, what they desire, what their expectations are. So that's really was the beginning of White Knight for me. Was about really trying to explore that. Was this idea that actually, what I always loved about outdoor arts was it was always about the sort of taking over sort of spaces, that sort of improvisational sort of standing in a space with a lot of people that you might not have planned to have been there in that encounter. But what was happening was that technology was really sort of profoundly changing the way that people wanted to see it. They wanted to be able to influence what was happening. And of course, in terms of interactivity, I mean, that's what outdoor arts has always been very good at. And the outdoor arts that I've always enjoyed from all sides of the angle, whether that's been as an audience member or as someone who commissions work, has been that stuff where actually, the interactive activity is really important. So outdoor artists, people who work in that space, have got a lot to give in terms of understanding the sort of different desires and expectations of the audience. That piece is Circa 69. That was commissioned for White Knight 2008. And so we were trying to really explore that, how you could present something that's essentially a VR experience, but within the context of a sort of exploratory festival, and obviously using a lot of those sort of tropes of sort of circus and street arts. And that sort of leads on to the sort of second thing as well, which was interesting that Hilary said the same thing. So, the fact that things will go wrong, technology inevitably goes wrong. I've taken the really safe option here of having a bunch of PowerPoint slides, not very sort of tech savvy on this. But that whole idea about designing for the unexpected, I always felt that the best outdoor artists were always really able to sort of deal with that, really able to sort of make the technology disappear. And when the technology goes wrong, just style that out, because actually it was never about the kit. It's always about the idea or the performance. And so that's a real sort of strength that the outdoor arts sector sort of brings to this field and to these collaborations. And for me, that feels like, we're in that sort of same space of digital, collective digital work as well. It feels like it's a new sort of practice, even though actually it also feels like it's been around for a long time. And one of the things that really made that work was the fact that the way that the creation centres in France supported that work. So it's brilliant to be standing in a creation centre sort of talking about this, because I think actually it was those spaces that really made these new ideas possible. So spaces, when you're thinking about how you might collaborate, you need to think about the space in which you are making the work. So when we produced XR Circus, which was 2018, we tried to think about a variety of different spaces that we might use. So Without Wars, Sea Change Arts and Freedom Festival were partners in that. So Sea Change were able to make available their incredible sort of circus creation centre in Great Yarmouth. But we also used the Fuse Box in Brighton, which is a very high-tech sort of co-working space, looks more towards the pervasive media studios for its inspiration. And we also use lots of university innovation labs as well. And we also use the sort of the spaces that the artists use themselves and technicians use. And so thinking about the mix of spaces that you might need for your work, there's not sort of one size that fits all, but they sort of do matter. So when you're planning your project, you might want to think about, you know, who you can partner with that will bring in those new resources. The other thing that I think was really significant in terms of the innovation that was happening in those early days of street arts was around a lot of the creation centres were festivals led, and I think festivals play a really important role in this sort of innovation, not least because, you know, the show's got to go on. You know, when you've got a festival, the show's got to go on. And in a way, it doesn't really matter if the content has changed a bit, you know, the time constraint is non-negotiable. And I think that can be a really useful practice to put into yourself as well, is don't get so hung up about the idea. I think we can be quite stuck in a commission culture, where you're asked to come up with an idea before you know the context, before you know how it's going to change when you're with the audience or with the spaces you need. And I think the more that you can sort of remind yourself to be open to get there, but to give yourself that sort of fixed deadline, I think that can be a very helpful thing. And festivals are great for that. This is from these are some stills from Exile Circus. So we use that as in a very intense and very terrifying way that we always were saying you are going to have to be doing a show as in the Spiegel tent as part of the Brighton Festival. That's going to happen, you know, that's going to happen then, and you know, that sort of unsettling the artists, but also trying to create a sort of supportive space for them to feel that they could explore, but they would need to meet this deadline. Because the other thing, you know, the other sort of two aspects of it is one which is that, you know, in digital, as in outdoor arts, when you looked at the sort of way the creation centres work, everyone was an expert and everyone's not an expert. So, you know, there was always a sort of sense of the way that those creation centres worked was almost like social. We used to say democratic, but actually I think it was more sort of socialist in its principles. So if you could weld or if you could play the trombone exceptionally well, those things are equally valued. So there was always a sense that everyone's sort of contribution would be respected within that space, and that really leads to the best sorts of collaborations. But also they're a learning space as well. So there's also a recognition that doesn't, you know, there isn't a hierarchy between the artist, the creative technician, the producer, the audience, the participant. And I think it's a really useful to remind yourself of those sort of democratic values when you're at the beginning of these collaborations. So the other part of that sort of how a festival can be a really important partner within that is this idea about digital and outdoor arts both sort of share this iterative process. You know, part of it might use different language, but actually, you know, you can't imagine an outdoor arts piece without having that, you know, it gets shaped so much by the way that the audience interacts with it. It grows over its lifetime. And that's exactly the same way in digital. In fact, that is the absolutely the way it works. When you look at the sort of the language of it, they might use different terms like beta, they might use sprints, pivots, all those sorts of language, but essentially it's the same way that outdoor arts has always evolved, which is through understanding the feedback of the interaction that's there. And as Alison sort of said at the beginning as well, that's always been, it's not just about sort of understanding the sort of human condition, it's not about just sort of communicating to the audience, because of course, to get an interaction, you need to be able to be reflecting something, you know, you need to be wanting to say something, essentially. But it's also around sort of recognising that people are sort of in a social construct. So when we go to an outdoor arts event, actually we're not just seeing it, it's not just about how we might feel about that show in the same way that when you have a sort of how you might feel about when you're sort of sitting there passively enjoying either a play or a film or something like that. It's more about also how you see other people react to it, and that becomes a real sort of, I think street artists can be really fantastic sort of masters of choreographing that sort of relationship between people to each other as well, and how they react to each other. And that might be called sort of, you know, user design or social user design, but outdoor artists really bring that as a great strength to them. And then finally, it was just, and this has come up a couple of times, but it's this like sense of, you know, what it's for, and the other similarity about digital and physical is these spaces are both, you know, in digital worlds are very sort of contested spaces. There's like the same issues about privacy. There's those same issues of ownership and about consent and who's welcome in those spaces. And interestingly, digital technology has been used to control those public spaces as well. So you've got all these infrastructures that have evolved, which might be around sort of surveillance cameras, it might be around smart city monitoring. You know, there's all of these sort of invisible infrastructures that govern our the way that we walk in the world. You know, it's just there, but a lot of it is quite invisible. So I think this notion of like, how do artists make that visible? How do they sort of make that apparent? And that can either be in a playful way or it can be in an overtly political way. But I think sometimes in that same way that when you know, outdoor arts was always fantastic at sort of illustrating those sort of ownership. You know, you'd reveal it by putting on an event somewhere. You'd understand who owns that space, who controls access to that space. And there's a real opportunity there, I think, to come together to try and both explore digital spaces as contested spaces, but also to make visible those sort of you know, those infrastructures within our public spaces. And this was a phrase that which you probably recognise from 1968 sort of Paris riots, the situationist motto, this sur le pave la plage, but it was also like the ZAP motto in the 90s, in the mid-90s, and it feels very relevant. And it's this idea that behind all of this sort of infrastructure, we can sort of rip it up and we can play it and we can be ourselves. We can be social animals. There's a natural space there, and I think it's it's a good motto for these collaborations too.
Thank you very much.